Welcome to Race Control in the Volvo Ocean Race headquarters. I'm Jenny Tillich, joined today by Craig Leweck, sailing journalist and editor of Sailing Scuttlebutt News, and Dawn Riley, two-time race veteran who was on board the first all-female team in the Round the World race. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Let's start out today with a blog from skipper Charles Caudrelier yesterday. I'm quoting him here. He says, "I'm feeling tired, or rather worn out. We're feeling the pain, but I'm not too worried. It's not just us, it's the other boats too. We can't lie to each other on this race. It breaks you down little by little. The end of the race will be won by the last man standing." Dawn, you've been there, you've lived it. What is he talking about?
Well, you know what, I was thinking about that. I saw that. I think that it's possible that this is like an unintended consequence of their dismasting. And they got a break, right? They got to not sail for a few days, and the boat was more or less delivered to them, but that threw off their rhythm. So I wouldn't be surprised if all the adrenaline of that breaking mast and then the recovery and getting the rhythm out really has affected them a little bit more than others. But with that being said, this race with the boats in sight of each other, it's a buoy race continuously over and over, day in and day out. So that has to be exhausting.
Craig, what about you, your views on this?
Well, first, it's just great to hear from Charles. You know, one of the consequences, I guess, of the onboard reporters the onboard reporters are doing a great job sharing the stories, but still we do like to focus on the leaders of each team, and hearing from guys like Charles really brings me on board, gives me a sense of what's going on, and I appreciate when these guys take the time to really share these kind of sentiments, because it really heightens our connection to what's going on in the boats.
Dawn, we don't actually often hear that sort of thing from skippers. Essentially, they're admitting they're worn down or they're tired. That's what Charles is doing. Do you think, I mean, he's basically said, we're not playing mind games. This is it. But he also actually said, the same blog, he says, a competitor came up to me on the dock and said, "This is my last ever Volvo, never again," while he's still fighting for the victory. You know that he too is struggling and not even trying to hide it. And I'm just wondering, it sounds to me like that was an Ian Walker thing. It sounds like that's a mind game that's maybe being played with Charles, and yet he's just bearing his soul. So talk a little bit about that. Do you think they are playing mind games ashore, or do you think they are just completely open-hearted?
Well, once you're a competitor, you're definitely a competitor. But with that being said, there's no question they're exhausted. And also, to the point of never doing this race again, I think every single sailor who's ever done the Volvo has said that at one point, and then surprising number of them are back on the race the next edition.
Especially after leg 5, probably. Craig, you follow a lot of sailing events. You followed a lot of Volvos. Do you think this one is actually mentally and physically harder because of this one design aspect, because the boats are always in sight, making it, like Dawn said, a buoy race around the world?
It's got to be, because they are, as you say, and you're always pushed more. You know, whether you're tuning or whether you're racing, you're always pushed more when you are right beside someone. How many times have we gotten off the start line and we lock in with the boat to leeward of us, and maybe by mistake go too far to the left, but we're so keyed into that boat, and that's what these guys are going through. They are keyed into their other teams. They are trying to learn from the other teams, to the point where they're afraid to make a tactical mistake. They're locking into each other so much. But it's got to be wearing. And what I find is interesting is how each team is trying to adapt to the AIS, because they're not always within sight of each other, but with that system, they're so often have a good idea of where the other team is, and you're hearing how they're trying to rely on that or utilize that system less and less, because it really is driving them nuts. It really is wearing them down, having that much information.
Yeah, if I can jump in here, I was thinking it's got to be like 3 levels of frustration if you're slower than a boat near you. One, you can see them and you get the binoculars out and you sit there and talk and analyze and second guess and start to try to make changes so you can improve your speed and wonder if it's just a puff, if it's a current, what's going on. The second one is with AIS, because that's only one data point. That's really just speed and course. And then the third one is when you're outside of AIS range and you just know you're slower. That goes back to what we raced in those conditions. You either were slower and faster, and you only knew every 4 or 6 hours if you had made any gains or not.
And I think Amory Ross said the other day how he thinks their team sails better when they're out of range, because it just allows them to free up and sail their own race, truly sail their own race, and not be so preoccupied with what's going on around them.
It was actually a really interesting comment to hear that from Amo. I mean, we hear from the sailors that they like it, that they do get to have this constant sort of feedback of how they're doing, and yet Amo's like, it's not making them better. They're just more stressed when they're sailing. So let's talk now. Let's talk about the fleet as it stands on this leg, and we can start with the back of the pack. Let's talk about Alvi Medica. Craig, what do you think maybe of them as a team and of where they are in this leg? Do they have the ability to come back from there? I mean, this is the home stretch. They want to win to Newport.
They want to win, but we don't always get what we want. And the good news about the One Design concept is that it got, 7 good teams on the start line, and every boat had a chance to win. The bad news is that it put the focus on the people on board. And you could say that's not bad news. That's how it should be. However, it does, it does key in on everyone's experience. And as great as it is to keep saying they're the youngest team, they're also one of the least experienced teams. And every team is getting better every leg. I mean, that's what this game is about. So it's really hard to catch up. And you could say they maybe had more room to improve, but we're 6.5 months into this race, and the pecking order isn't getting shuffled too much. And I want these guys to do well. This leg has been pretty straightforward. It hasn't had a whole lot of opportunity to really leverage a good idea. What are they today? They're not catching up, and so I'm cheering for them. But it's starting to look harder and harder for them to make gains.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Don, the team with perhaps less experience in Alvi Medica, the women's team, Team SCA, you helped pave the way for women's sailing, especially around the world. Do you think, given the stiff competition they have and that One Design aspect, that they were sort of doomed to be struggling to make the podiums?
Well, first, let me talk about Alvi Medica, just because Charlie and Mark are graduates of Oak Cliff in our program. So we want them to win very, very much so. And I think the chance for this leg is really at the very end when they get up closer to Newport and there's some weather systems. I agree with Craig right now. It's just keep the boats going, and through the trade winds, it's pretty steady. So with SCA, I was really, really looking for them to be a winner, to place in the top half of the fleet. They had money early, which is always critical. They have really good sailors on board. They have less experience maybe in the Volvo, but not when you look at it straight up. But Dee Kafari and Sam have been around the world multiple times, so there's a fair amount of experience. And I'm truly scratching my head as to why they're not doing better. I mean, I know in the last leg when they broke their fro and then they skipped off of a weather pattern, that's something I'm very familiar with. Once you drop back, you're done. But I really expected, and in port races, and they're doing fine, I just expected to see more of that out in the middle of the ocean, and I just don't know why. I can't wait till they get to Newport. I'm going to buy them a drink and find out.
Okay, Craig, your thoughts on her answer, because it is kind of true. It is a team that did have a lot of funding and a lot of practice early on. They had 2 boats. They had a 2-boat testing system. I think people were expecting performance, and they've been saying from the beginning they needed the experience. But it's great to actually see the support they have in the stopovers and online. So I think in terms of getting people excited about sailing and women in sailing, that's wonderful. But what do you think it means for the sport to have them in, and what do you think they could maybe do on the water that would help them perform a bit better?
Well, I think we sitting in our spectator seats are confused because we all thought they'd be closer, and I think even the racers. I mean, when I talked to Ian Walker in Auckland, he was puzzled because all these boats have been around each other enough to know that they can go the same speed. Yet when we get further into the race, just a small percentage off optimum is enough to, send you pretty badly, down the rank. And again, what we're probably seeing is every boat is getting better, but when you've got, when you're a little bit behind in the beginning, it's hard to make up that ground. I wonder if we looked at performance data, we could see how much better SEA is doing in this leg than, the first leg. Yet, perhaps that same data is going to be consistent to all the teams. So it's just a real hard game to catch up, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, the pecking order doesn't get shuffled that much in a lot of these legs, and it's kind of why it's so much fun to see these diverse weather systems come through, because it really does give an opportunity to shuffle it as much as probably the lead or more experienced teams, hate that thought. It's we're sitting here and we want to be engaged, and it's fun when things change.
Okay, let's talk about the leaders then. They might not want diverse weather systems, but there are sort of the top four boats who seem to be playing with each other often. They have very different leadership styles, Don. From Charlie, who's young. Well, I guess this is the whole fleet. Charlie, who's young, to Motfre, who's splitting skippers, to Charles, who sort of is so emotional in front of his team, and then Bauer, who's so calm all the time, whether they're doing well or not, and Ian, obviously, who rubs his head so much he's like a genie in a bottle. But which one of these do you think maybe is the best? I mean, we know who's at the top of the leaderboard, but in terms of actually seeing them as leadership styles, what's your thoughts, having been a skipper of multiple teams?
I think that the one comment I can have to that, because both Bauer and Ian are excellent, and they've been there and they know the game, and they'll have an innate form of leadership just from the experience. Everybody around here talks about it like carrying your experience in a duffel bag. But with the French team, I'm really impressed, and I think a lot of that is with the OC Sports Management and Mark Turner, but Bruno Dubois, who's Belgian, married to a Canadian, lived in Canada and French. And so he talked to me early on when they were first putting this together, and we talked about how to form the team. I think this is, even though I know Groupama won last time, this is the first really super successful, essentially French-led multinational team. And I think that goes for the leadership of the whole organization, not just on board the boat.
Yeah, fair enough. Craig, to you?
Well, again, to Dongfeng, I think they are the most exciting team because they're the most different. When this one design concept got put in place, it was going to be all about the sailors. Everyone was going to have to be super experienced. You're going to need a ton of drivers, and we're going to be pushing these boats hard. And here you have a boat where you've got a number of people that are super specialists, super fast. And then you've got the Chinese influence, where these guys are big-time contributors, but contributing differently. And I almost wonder, I mean, we're not on board the boat, but I almost wonder if everyone has got a very specific role, and you're focusing as hard as you can at that role, and you're going to be the best as you can be at that role, versus some of the other teams where there's people that can do a number of roles. And you could argue whether, what is going to be most draining, and you could probably argue, again, back to Charles' initial quote, the Dongfeng format could be most draining, because you've got a certain number of people have the most pressure on them, versus the other teams where maybe the pressure is distributed a little bit better. But it is really cool to see how well they're doing because of the French, because this race hasn't always, this race has had a lot of emphasis with Australians and New Zealanders, and seeing Groupama do well last time was a real shot in the arm, and to see that continue this time is important, and to see this team, how it is put together, excel, and something's always happening to them too, which is cool. I mean, they're breaking stuff. I mean, we want to see, they don't want to see stuff break, but we do.
Yeah.
We want to see challenges. I mean, that's what this race is. If these boats don't break, it's good that they don't break, but at the same time, it provides this story element that you just can't script. And they seem like something's always happening to them, which is makes you get connected to them.
Yeah, very much so. And we always keep wondering ashore, I mean, whether they're just pushing the boat that tiny bit harder. They always seem to have, like Abu Dhabi has now, just an extra little bit of speed that got them back into the game when they were behind, and then something would break. And so it could be a combination of all kinds of things, bad luck, the mast obviously hopefully being bad luck, but maybe we thought they were pushing a bit harder. But let's take that to Abu Dhabi, a team who hasn't really broken down very often, who's now been helped by it to top the leaderboard. Do you think they can stay there for the rest of the race, Don?
I think they have a good shot. I saw something somewhere Ian mentioned that they were really happy with their sales selection and usage. And I think that is one of the very few areas with this super strict one design rule that you can actually make some decisions. And that was what I was frankly, I mean, I understand the one design and I know how it goes and I've seen it work, with multi one design 70s. But I was concerned that it was taking a lot of the strategic decision making out of it other than weather and just, riding the boats around the world. So it's kind of interesting to see his experience coming there and using, identifying that his sales selection and choices are helping him in the race. So if that continues, to me, that's something that would help them continue to win because it's strategic, it's thought out, and they're confident.
Yeah. And they definitely, Ian, someone said today actually that he's been learning how to win a Volvo Ocean race over his past couple Volvos. He was one of the first teams to step in when they said it was one design and to put a team together. Craig, do you think this is true? Do you think he's been on the path to learning and this is the setup?
I think we're finding out how good Ian Walker is. The last two editions, he hasn't had the boat to demonstrate it. And I think in the 2008-2009 edition, his first race, he'd hardly been an offshore sailor. So he has grown significantly. 3 consecutive races is huge. Now he's got a boat that will allow him to show how good he is. And probably what he's doing that's probably the hardest is, as he spoke to me about, he's turning this into a 9-race Olympic regatta, and it's easy to say, but when you're offshore, it's a whole different game. But if you can keep that mindset of conservative, covering, use your speed, stick to the game plan, easy said than done. That can get lost when you're offshore, when you're fatigued. Ian is showing us how good he is, and I see no reason why anything's going to change.
Well, the good news is there's 3.5 legs left for the other teams to catch up to that lead. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you all online as well, and have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday on the next Inside Track.